Welcome to Socializing Security, where every week we have a discussion about security, compliance, and beyond.
Our goal is to learn and grow by socializing each week's topic with each other, our guests, and with you.
A quick compliance note, this podcast is meant for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal or regulatory advice.
We're glad you've joined us, and we hope you'll learn along with us. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Socializing Security. We are glad to have you on board again this week and have a really great interview teed up for this episode. So this week we're gonna talk a little bit about identity and access management, and we've got a real practitioner joining us this week, Robert Fowler, who is the Director of Information and Cybersecurity at Tyson Foods. So really excited to hear his perspective on things. He's been on the speaking circuit and sharing some information about where he thinks the future of authentication is going. So I, for one, am super excited to hear what he has to say, given that it seems like we're in a really rapid pace of change when it comes to authentication, where you end up having a lot of authentication protocols that we're used to just almost on a quarterly basis being proven to be not secure enough. There are reports out there that show, hey, it takes this long to crack this type of password, and it's getting pretty close to the point where passwords aren't going to be sufficient anymore. So really excited to hear from him and what he has to say on the topic.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think we've all heard, over the last couple of years that they're like, oh, passwords aren't the future, right? Like the future is passwordless, and that there will be different means for us to authenticate into our system accounts to making sure that we're verified in different ways beyond just like an 8-character password. And we've already seen this, I know it's one of the things we're definitely going to talk about is the rapid adoption of passkeys and what that looks like with Robert. But I'm really excited to just have somebody with such a very specific focus and also just like a wide breadth of experience. So it's pretty amazing to see. He's really had his career very much at Tyson. He's almost been there for 20 years, which is incredible, but has held all different types of roles. So definitely very, very well versed in the IT and cyberspace. So I'm looking forward to having his experience to just shine a light on what he's kind of anticipating the future of identity and access management will look like. I think we're going to be talking through a couple of the potentials of, I know while we were prepping, we were talking about maybe some brainwave activity or what it's going to look like. So I think this episode will get a little bit futuristic, but I'm excited about what we're going to talk about with him.
Yeah, futuristic is definitely an area I think we'll tread into. Some of it may not be as futuristic either. I mean, there's a lot of talk around quantum computing and how that's going to completely upend everything we do security-wise, both encryption and authentication-wise. So I know he's got some information there. Having done identity and access management for quite a while, he's seen a lot of this change, going all the way back to the days when it was just a password. And then we said, hey, if you carry this little device that has a little screen on here and these numbers change every so often, and in order to authenticate, not only do you need your password, but you need the numbers on this little key. And we would lose those things, and it was an interesting time back then when we had to carry those around. And then things happened and those became less secure, and we had to move on to something else. So there's a lot of change that has happened and will continue to happen. And some of the things you look at first and you're like, that doesn't really sound like it would be that secure. Like, I have to rely on my phone to get logged in. Like, sure, I carry my phone everywhere with me, but I don't necessarily always have it. If someone steals it, does that make me less secure? I'm really stoked to talk to him about those types of things and better understand somebody who's really deep into that space, kind of how he views these things and where he likes to take a massive corporation in order to keep them secure.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversation. So I think we should just bring him on and dive in.
Yep, let's do it. Robert, thank you for joining us. I'm really excited to have you. We kind of just gave everybody a little bit of background on who you are, but we'll have you kind of do a quick intro of yourself so people can kind of hear your voice and get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me today. So I'm Robert Fowler. I work for a wonderful food company, Tyson Foods, and I've been here for 19 years. And I work in the identity and access management space. I'm the director for identity and access management here. And I've been in technology I mean, since I was a teenager, back before the internet, when we were still dialing up on modems, having all that kind of fun. But I love technology, I love cybersecurity, and I love talking to folks like you that are interested in this information.
Yeah, yeah, we really appreciate having you on. So having that long history, and that's definitely something that we want to touch on is your perspective of what's gotten us here and where you're going. But I know you've also done a fair bit of speaking out there. So being somebody who's out there helping the industry move forward, we respect a lot. So it's really, really awesome to have you here to hear those types of things. So maybe let's just kind of start with where you feel the industry is right now. I know there's been a lot of churn over the last 20 years that, we went from, hey, you just need a password and it doesn't matter how long it is. You put the word password in there and it'll be okay on any and every site, to today that's nearly impossible to do. And sometimes it takes way more than that. So maybe give us kind of where you think we are today and kind of how we got here.
I feel that if you look over the last 3 decades, the ability for authentication, its capabilities, they have grown out of necessity. And so what I mean by that is, it used to be maybe a long time ago, you'd put a BIOS password on your PC, and there was so many ways around that. You move into enterprise use of computers, of networks. Now you started needing passwords, but then as you started moving into the cloud, well, you weren't worried about people internally, you were worried about people externally. And that's really where passwords started becoming an issue by themselves. And the move into multi-factor authentication, it's been great, but not all forms of authentication are equal.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point. I like that a lot, in the fact that, when we were highly centralized and there was very little internal external movement, password wasn't really, I don't want to say it wasn't for security, but it was more about making sure that, yeah, you really are the person you say you are. So when we go log it, we know who did it. It was a very low barrier to today, when everything's online, everything's available. It's really, really difficult. And, I've helped some customers in these spaces where they have dark sites. It's really hard to do a dark site these days because we're so used to everything being online.
Yeah, I kind of think of passwords like locks on your front door. So they're there to keep honest people honest, but
Yeah.
they're not going to keep the really bad guys out.
Yeah, I guess when we're talking about multi-factor authentication specifically, what are some of the kind of like the best practice recommendations you feel like are there preferred methods that you would definitely say, like from an auth perspective, you would definitely recommend?
I think it has to be fit for purpose and fit for risk. In cybersecurity, we talk so much about risk. And so putting certain high friction, high authentication patterns into place for a low risk area, that doesn't make sense. So maybe you have executives and you need a higher form of MFA. But if you have somebody that just logs in to check their benefits and they don't use other technology or have access to other things, do they still need that same level of authentication? I'll give you an example. We've all heard about SMS hijacking. And so SMS is a common form of authentication. Even banks use it today. But anymore, you can't just walk up and get it. There's probably about $1,000 that you have to have as a bad actor to be able to go do that SIM swap. That's what the industry experts are saying. Is your risk higher or lower than that? Is it worth it to the bad guys? And so that's where you have to look at your authentication and make sure it's fit for purpose.
Yeah, I like that, taking that risk-based approach just when we're talking about like system access on an individual like group basis of what tooling, what systems, and what type of data that they have access to, and building out your identity and access management plan around your individual use case, because every company's response is different, but also every company structure, their hierarchy, and how they're actually sharing information between their internal users is just different. So I like what you've just said for making sure that it's fit to purpose. I think that makes a lot of sense. Of doing it one size fits all just does not make sense for every company.
So I don't really want to go down the rabbit hole of how do you assess risk, because that's another whole episode someday. But I guess what are the challenges around making sure that you've got that right level? I mean, obviously the time to figure out the risk, there's an expense to, more of that. The time that it takes for somebody to authenticate and get in versus, their need to get access to it. Like, what are those balances that you've got to deal with around all that?
Yeah, you're right. Beyond the risk portion, there's the friction piece. If your friction is too high, people won't use it, or they'll find a really bad way to get around it. And
the classic meme of, hey, here's the sidewalk that's at a 90-degree angle, and here's the path that clearly people are taking to shortcut it.
yeah, exactly. Shadow IT, shadow security, whatever the case may be. So that's where you have to evaluate your friction level and partner with your GRC experts to look at it from a risk standpoint also.
Yeah, one of the areas that I think I've found a little surprising in the current state where we're at on the identity and access management side was the rapid adoption of passkeys. Like, I feel like every single service and system that I have, especially the large players, are using passkeys instead of their traditional login paths, and seem to be very much like pushing that as the end user experience. What are your thoughts on kind of that newer development? I think within the last year, we've really seen pretty rapid adoption on that space.
Yeah, I think passkeys as a factor are wonderful, but it's not a use case where you can use it across the board in every situation. I recently attended the Identiverse conference, and the FIDO Alliance, they were strong there. The president, he was giving an interview, and one of the things he noted was over the last 2 years, where they've come with passkeys, it's amazing. It's not just, well, here's an idea. Companies across the board, they're adopting it, and it's allowing for a much more secure authentication method. But again, a lot of times it's tied to a device. And if you are working or going into an environment where you can't have that device or something that can authenticate you with that, you've got to look for other factors that, again, are fit for purpose.
Yeah, so my biggest concern with the passkeys ends up becoming, I'm dependent on my phone. And, one of my fears ends up being, what if somebody gets my phone and gets access to my phone? How much access do they get if it's nothing but a passkey? They've got the one key, as opposed to having to type in a password that theoretically I know, but is most likely in my password vault that can be accessed on my phone, ideally behind a biometric or another passphrase. So how do you see that balance? Like, do you fear the fact that people are going to lose their phone and then that's going to lose their passkey, and one, they won't have access to it, and two, somebody else may be able to access it instead of them?
Yeah, I think that making sure that your passkeys are protected behind a biometric is important, so that even if somebody else gets access. But the other thing is education. Most people do not really understand what a passkey is or how it works. They just know, okay, now I don't have to do a password, but I keep being prompted for these other things. And having more than one passkey set up, having it stored on more than just one device, most people wouldn't have a single key for their house. They're going to make a backup. They're going to give it to a neighbor. Hopefully, they're not going to put it under their rug. But it's the same principle, but it just goes back to education and people understanding the technology they're using.
So as you look at those types of technologies, obviously there's a lifespan to things, and we've seen it in the past. We've seen it with token-based authentication, particularly the ones from RSA, where those tokens ended up not being good at a certain point. They were challenging because people would lose them. Now we use our phone that has very similar type of technology on them to create those passcodes that we can use as kind of a second factor of authentication. There's a lot of talk about quantum computing to be able to break encryption, to be able to break passwords a lot faster. There's reports that come out about, hey, if you have this type of password, it'll be cracked in this amount of time, and it keeps getting worse and worse to the point where sooner or later passwords just aren't going to work. I know you've done a lot around different types of authentication, thinking really outside of the box. Let's talk about that for a bit. Like, what are some of the near term things that you see being used for authentication?
Yeah, so this is a fun one, and the reason why is last fall I'm on a flight back from Europe. Actually, I think they let me know before the flight, but I'm working on this during the flight. I get a call from a conference coordinator, and he's like, "Look, we need a fill-in," and the conference was in 3 weeks. He's like, "Whatever you want to talk about," and I'm like, "All right, anything?" And
Wow.
he's like, "Anything." So I said, "Okay." I said, "How about I talk about futuristic authentication methods?" And the reason why is because it's great. You just, get to go research, hey, what are people doing? What are some of the ideas out there? And everybody loves to talk about, flying cars that we were going to have 25 years ago. And so these are the flying cars of authentication. I did a presentation on it. The first one I had in there, because most of these fall back into those three main categories. You have something something that you have, or something that you are. And I heard somebody once call it something that you forget, something that you lose, or something you don't want to share.
Yeah, I love that perspective.
But the first one that I talked about, whenever I shared it last fall, I really thought this is way out there. And that was thought-based authentication. So researchers at Osaka University, they came up with this, and you've probably seen a lot of these in the news, but what made theirs different from others was a lot of others, they would do machine learning. So I'd say, Brian, think of an airplane. And so then you'd think of an airplane, they'd record what your brainwave activity was to help replicate that. Well, at Osaka University, they presented their subjects with images, and then they simply recreated the images based on brain activity alone. So there was no models, no training, anything like that. And they showed some of the pictures that they did. You can go search for Osaka University and that, but they showed them an airplane, and it showed the recreation. And it's like, oh, that's kind of an airplane, or a teddy bear. It's like, oh, that's a really bad looking teddy bear, but okay. So there's that technology out there. University of California is doing another one to interpret brainwaves into words or letters for a different purpose than authentication. But would you like to just think your password?
I mean, that'd be awesome. It's, you open up the website and it says, hey, think about that thing. And quite frankly, that could be two factors there on its own. Like, what is the thing you need to think about, and the brainwave that it picks up. So you kind of have one step with two authentication methods, which is kind of cool when you really think about it, because it's so much more natural than type in this random set of numbers and letters that maybe means something to you, but maybe doesn't. And then you've got to go grab your phone and open up this app and you type in a bunch of numbers. And yeah, going back to that point about friction, that's so much lower friction to be able to get to that point.
I feel like I'm going to have a hard time remembering the images. Like, it's one thing to think about. I'm like trying to think of what my password vault, like if I use a password manager, what that would look like then, of like having to describe. This feels like, those like password hints that you put in to your like machine or whatever, when they're like, your IT is like, you cannot forget this one. So put out some type of hint that you won't forget. And you try to make it like as vague as possible that you'll remember, but nobody else would be able to easily guess your actual password. I think I'm trying to think through what my vault would look like, because I'm sure I could recreate the image of an airplane within 3 months, but suddenly what I'm thinking an airplane would look like 2 years later, I have no clue if it would pull the same type of image.
Yeah, it's almost a fidelity problem on the brainwaves. I'm also now imagining the reverse authentication situation where, some sites you have to pick an image for the site to show you so that you're on the right site. Now all of a sudden, hey, pick one of these three to be your brainwave image, and it shows you three images. One of those three is the right one. You just have to look at that one and think about it. And now you know that that's the right site because that's the image that you pick for that site. This is fun stuff. I like talking about this.
It's funny because all the researchers that are working out at the different companies, and they've got different methods for how they're doing it using machine learning and not. But you look at, the richest man on earth, he's pouring money into Neuralink right now.
Mm-hmm.
And you can go to Neuralink.com and you can sign up to have a chip implanted in your brain as a test subject. I don't think I'll be rushing out today for that, but let me ask you, if you had to say today, would you say that that is secure as Fort Knox or a cardboard box if they asked you to use it?
As far as Neuralink goes, or as far as the brainwaves go?
Let's go with the brainwaves.
I would have to research a little bit more to understand, again, that fidelity question, how accurate it is, how unique me thinking about an airplane versus you thinking about an airplane versus Mila thinking about an airplane. Like, we could all, does it matter whether I think about a Cessna or a 747? All those questions come into play when I think about a new authentication mechanism like that. But assuming the research is pushing towards, it's more unique than your fingerprint type of thing. It's like, the retina scan is more unique than a fingerprint and it's a lot harder to reproduce. I would venture to say that we're talking more Fort Knox at that point, especially, like I said, if we combine this with other factors of authentication.
Yeah, I think so too. I think of some of the other ones we've talked about, I think that this one has the potential to being very unique to an individual user and really hard to crack with somebody else. Like, how would you know what it would look like unless you could describe it? But even if you described it, even if I described what I would see as an airplane, I'm sure the three of us would interpret that completely differently.
Telephone game.
Yep, I agree. So the another one in that presentation that I did was on embedded microchips. And so there's a website. I'm not advocating that you go to it. I'm not promoting it, but there is the dangerousthings.com website out there where people can literally go buy implantables. And you can either do it yourself or you can have it professionally implanted. And it's got like these RFID chips. They've got some other things that are magnets, several different options. And that way, instead of, hey, here's my badge to get in, I just wave my finger. Or you have most phones have an RFID reader right there on top. People are actually, this just like, no way, I don't think I'd ever want that. But people are actually doing that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm always amazed by how much people are willing to give up for convenience. We see it every day in security. We see it with PII. I'm the type of person that's like, yeah, I don't know that I trust my data with Facebook, TikTok, Twitter. Even though I used to be a huge Twitter user, the way those platforms are going, I'm not confident I want to put stuff out there anymore for them to consume and use. So I'm much less excited about the concept of embedded chips. Just one, foreign objects in your body is always an interesting subject, and we know for a fact, just the way society is, that it'll never be widely accepted. It's one of those that also just triggers the dystopian sci-fi fan in me. Like, that's where all of the bad places lead to that. Why would we want to go there? And I'm not saying that that's going to be bad just because sci-fi is, use that as a way to make it bad. They've used it in good ways as well. So that's definitely more of a technology. I don't know if I would say it was more or less safe, but is more cringy, maybe.
Yeah, can you imagine if your chip gets breached or something? Like it's corrupted or some way, and then, yeah. I think you and I are definitely the wrong people to ask, Brian, because I think we're both very privacy-minded. So I think you and I would definitely be like, absolutely not. We will come up with any other way to authenticate ourselves as opposed to like probably implanting ourselves with a physical chip that we don't have control over. I love that my head automatically goes to then thinking about, man, I'm curious like how the EU would regulate the use of implantable chips as opposed to like on the US side. From a data protection privacy perspective, I would love to hear what the EU regulators have on thoughts about that, just because I think there's such a risk of privacy concerns related to that I think that would be really, really difficult to get widespread adoption, specifically in the EU. But yeah, I do know that people are using them. Like I know there's somebody I follow on TikTok that is definitely like using this and has it set up to like open doors in their house.
Well, and that kind of takes, if you flip the script, either of you have any pets? Would you inject one in your pets? They could come in through a door.
Maybe, but again, that's a risk to the security of the house, because pet gets out, somebody finds the pet. Guess what? They're getting in through the doggy door now. Of course, we do have implantable chips in pets today. You don't see tags around dogs' necks all the time anymore because they're using microchips. So it's not unheard of today. Obviously, it's not a authentication mechanism like you posited there, but it's a level of acceptance we've already had as a society.
Yeah. So, quick answer: cardboard box or Fort Knox?
I'm going to go halfway between the two.
I mean, it has the potential to be Fort Knox. I just won't use it.
All right. Let's. The next one that I talked about was quantum authentication. And so we probably all read stuff in the news about, oh no, quantum computing is coming. Our passwords are a thing of the history, our API keys, all of our encryption methods, everything that protects any types of key, certificate. Once it comes out, all that's gone. So if that's the case, you would have to use something from quantum computing, quantum signatures, to be able to become the new passwords / encryption keys, whatever the case may be. So on this one, right now, just the whole idea of it, you think back how big computers were and how big quantum computing, the computers that they're trying to build right now, quantum memory, it's not portable, but let's say one day it was, small enough to be in your smartphone. If that works, the idea behind it, and I'm not a quantum mechanics expert at all, but the research I've done on it is you got all these little tiny particles in the universe, and these tiny particles can be in multiple states at once, and they can be linked no matter how far apart they are. So the other great thing about this is that it would be impossible to intercept one of those or copy it without it changing it, without it knowing. You can't make a perfect copy of it. So it's almost like a one-time use key. So it can't be cloned or forged. That's the idea that researchers are looking at right now to use quantum signatures and quantum computing.
Yeah, more wild sci-fi stuff going on. Yeah, I mean the whole quantum computing thing is really wild. What you described is pretty much what I know about the space as well. But the way people talk about its potential, both positive and negative, is kind of crazy. And I get the feel like there's no way to have that something factor anymore, because it's so, you're talking about computers that are going to essentially supersede the human brain in its capacity to do things. Not necessarily intelligence, but its capacity to do things. And, that ability for me to be able to think of something that computer won't think about in less than a day. My understanding is it kind of becomes impossible at that point. Now we really have to rely on who you are, or things that you are, and things that you have, and maybe other things we haven't even thought about yet.
Yeah, I do know that there are divisions in cybersecurity for some of the top Fortune 10 companies that have teams just built that are working on things related to quantum computing, because they know once we get there, they can't be falling behind. And you've got all the researchers and everything else. I feel like that should be a Fort Knox, but right now it's just all theory. So
Yeah, pretty far out.
All right.
We're coming up on the end here. So you've got a lot of other really cool items on the list. So maybe list out what else is on the list here. I don't think we're going to be able to do them justice, but our hope here is that having guests like you on that provide these really cool things, and like my mind's going to be working on this for weeks now, that the audience has the opportunity to come in and they can post in our LinkedIn group and be able to continue this conversation. So I'd love for you to maybe just kind of throw some of these ideas out there and maybe see what the group is going to come up with.
Yeah, some of the others were nano tattoos that now become part of your biometric. So it becomes unique to you. Saliva authentication, which, that one, basically breath authentication. I think there's an episode of Star Trek somewhere out there that shows you how to defeat that one. Ear acoustic authentication, NEC has a patent on that. Then we've been hearing things from Apple over the last 6 months on using their ear pod technology, more for brainwaves than necessarily the shape of your canal. But there's so many different technologies out there. I mean, it's just fun thinking about what the future might hold and would I use that technology or not?
We're all going to be like using breathalyzers to log into our computers at a certain point.
Don't type and drink.
There's a whole other slew of privacy concerns with that. But yes, it seems like some of the other ones are a lot of who you are, as opposed to maybe some of the things you would know.
And sometimes it combines the two, something that you are with something that you have. And so in itself, it almost becomes a two-factor authentication.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think I'll be thinking about this for a while of also what my comfort level would be for some of these, specifically not only on the risk side, but also just from a privacy perspective of what would I feel comfortable with if I were giving my employer additional information, especially because biometrics is normally something that your employers don't actually have access to, right? So making sure that if we were suddenly giving them additional information, how would they be collecting that? So I guess in that vein, we do generally ask all of our guests the same question. So Robert, I would love to just pose it to you. I have recently had a CTO tell me that he thought that the fight for privacy was dead and that now it's really the fight for security. I would love to just get your thoughts on that. Do you feel like the fight for privacy is dead, or do you still think there's a valiant effort there?
I think that there are a lot of organizations and a lot of different policy perspectives on how do we keep things that should be private. The fight for security is important. And that's where companies, they have breaches all the time for your data that's protected, and how much do we trust them? But it goes back to that question before then, is sometimes it's a question of trust and sometimes it's a question of knowledge. How many EULAs do we click on, or how many things do we accept because it reduces friction? And until something bad happens, most people aren't going to be that concerned about it. And then whenever something bad happens, they probably become a very loud voice in the room on the matter of privacy.
Yeah, I like that. I think there's a complement between the two, right? I don't think the fight for privacy is dead personally, but I think the fight for privacy does absolutely dictate the need for the fight for security. So I think that's really where a lot of security professionals are saying, well, because we need to establish that trust in secure systems, because we don't want to end up in the news, right?
For sure. So Robert, why don't you give us any parting thoughts you have for the audience based on what we've talked about, and then give them kind of where they can contact you if they want to talk sci-fi ideas for authentication.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that in any situation, it's when preparation meets opportunity, or sometimes necessity. And what I mean by that is if you are relying on a single method for authentication, or a single method for your second factor of authentication, it's probably not going to be enough at some point. You talked earlier about how those RSA tokens, overnight, they were useless. And that is going to happen as technology advances, and certain forms of authentication are going to come and go. And so the more forms of authentication that are used that are fit for purpose, the better prepared every organization will be to be able to handle it when that day comes. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, Robert Fowler at Tyson Foods. And just a reminder, all the opinions on the show today are my thoughts, not my employer. But I do think I work for a great company. I've been back for 19 years, and I came back because I knew what a great company it was. So,
Amazing.
Yeah. How long of a tenure and a boomerang on top of that is usually a pretty good indicator. So good on them, and good on you for helping them out and being that kind of company, because we are all part of our culture. We appreciate everybody listening or watching. We are on YouTube as well as your podcast feed, so feel free to consume us however best fits your lifestyle. We would like to hear from you. So this topic, other topics, things you'd like to hear, let us know. info@socializingsecurity.com, or hit us up on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from all of you. But for now, thank you for listening with us and learning along.
Thanks so much, Robert. We really appreciate it.
thanks for having me.
Well, that was fantastic. I really enjoyed that conversation. How about you, Milo?
Yeah, Robert was really engaging, and I really enjoyed his perspective, and some of the futuristic things we talked about is definitely something I'll be thinking about.
If ever there was a conversation to underscore the fact that security is a constant cat and mouse game, the things are always changing, that adaptability is key, that was it. Especially when you start thinking about kind of the sci-fi elements of what may be coming. In fact, I think one of my big takeaways is I'm going to go through a bunch of sci-fi stuff and say, hey, how did they authenticate? Because sci-fi has always been really good at predicting what technologies we'll use in the future. So think Star Trek and cell phones, that kind of thing. I'm wondering if we already know what the new technology is. We just haven't developed it yet.
Yeah, someone just like predicted it already in a movie, but I think we'll see. Obviously, we've seen a large push from moving away from passwords to moving into passkeys, and I think where the future is headed, what we talked about on the episode, is also just like where biometrics are going to come into play more significantly. I think is ultimately it's going to probably be the most secure way for us to authenticate, even if there are additional privacy concerns with giving more devices sensitive personal information that is, can be used in a very different way than just like a corrupted password.
Yeah, it's a lot harder to give every site a different biometric than it is to give every website a different password. So that's one of those today's security best practices. Don't use the same password on multiple sites. I only have 10 fingers. I don't know if toe prints count, if we can go to that, but I guarantee I've got more than 20 sites I need to log into. Yeah, we'll have to see. There's a lot more uniqueness to the human body than I realized that I learned in that conversation. So I did enjoy the fact that a lot of them do cut down on that friction aspect of things. So hopefully we get these technologies rolled out and it becomes a much smoother experience for all of us.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think where we've already come in the identity and access management space, it's awesome to just like see how much it's changed. And the focus has very much been on security, because I think it's like 80% of breaches come from weak or compromised passwords. So there is still a very large gap in the market where there is still widespread use of weak or compromised passwords. And so just like as a quick reminder to our listeners of what can you do right now is making sure, you do have multi-factor authentication turned on. Look at what tokens you're using, right? SMS and email, while potentially useful, might not be the most secure option as an additional authentication token. So considering using like an authenticator app, and then thinking through, using unique passwords across multiple sites, potentially invest in a password manager, and making sure that that password is very complex and difficult to guess, but easy for you to remember. And yeah, going through the best practices while we're having them, and then think through the adoption of passkeys and stuff like that. While absolutely more convenient, does make you more reliant on some of your devices.
Yeah, and pay attention to new authentication methods that come out. You don't have to be a research expert necessarily to reading scientific papers and whatnot. Other people can do that for you and give you the lowdown. People like Robert are out there that are looking at those and are digging into it at that level that I wish I could, but I probably don't So having somebody like him to digest it is going to be very useful to all of us as these things move forward, I think. So who knows? I definitely see us potentially inviting him back to talk about some crazy new thing that happens out there.
Like saliva authentication or...
Yeah. Spit into your computer, please.
Something it would have to be weighed against like COVID concerns. And yeah.
I'm just imagining the coffee shop of the future. And with that happy note, maybe we should go ahead and cut out for the week. Again, appreciate everybody listening, and would love to hear everybody's thoughts about these types of things, because holy cow, there's just so much to consider.
Yeah, and again, we're really grateful for Robert and his time.
Yep. Cool. Well, take care, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Socializing Security. We hope you learned a thing or two with us.
If you'd like to continue socializing with us on this topic or have feedback, we'd love to hear from you on LinkedIn or social media. Just search for Socializing Security. Or you can email us at info@socializingsecurity.com.
Until next time, stay social and stay secure.